Hi, I'm Kaitlyn Fallon.
And I'm Trevor Bixby.
And this is our ear tour video.
Now we'll be going over the outer ear. Here is the auricle, otherwise known as the pinna. The pinna is made of the helix, the antihelix, the crus of the helix, and the crura of the antihelix. In between the crura of the antihelix is the triangular fossa. Here is the scaphoid fossa. And it's hard to see on this model, but here is where the symboclancia is. And here is the cavum clancia. You can't see on this model, but the tragus should be somewhere around here. Here is the antitragus and the intertragal notch. As we move further into the ear, here is the external auditory meatus. As you can see, 2/3 of the external auditory meatus is made of a cartilaginous portion, whereas 1/3 is comprised of the bony portion. The outer ear system ends here at the tympanic membrane.
Here we can see an up-close view of the tympanic membrane. You see the fibrous annulus, the cone of light, the manubrium of the malleus, and the umbo, the chorda tympani nerve, the long process of the incus, the normal vascular pedicle, and all around here is the pars tensa, and up here is the pars flaccida. The physiology of the outer ear includes the pinna, which improves sensitivity to high-frequency sounds of 3000 Hz. When the sound enters the ear canal, it allows the sound to warm, which improves the sound transmission to the inner ear. Cerumen glands produce the earwax that protects the natural cleaning process of the canal. When the sound reaches the eardrum, it aids in improving sound transmission to the inner ear. And now we're going to talk about the middle ear. As you can see, we can see the manubrium of the malleus, the incus bone, and the stapes bone, the 3 smallest bones in the body. The best way to remember the inner ear is to think of it as 6 walls: the superior wall, the inferior wall, the anterior wall, the posterior wall, the medial wall, and the lateral wall has been removed so that we can see inside. And here we see the middle ear. Right here on the lateral wall is the squamous portion of the tympanic bone and the tympanic membrane. On the posterior wall we have the adductus and the chorda tympani nerve, and later we'll see the parietal eminence. On the medial wall, we have the prominence of the cochlea and the tympanic nerves that rise up and down, the prominence of the facial nerve, and the prominence of the semicircular canals. Right here, we have the oval window where the stapes is, and just below that is going to be the round window, which we cannot see in this picture. Here we can see on the posterior wall the parietal eminence, which houses the stapedius muscle and is attached to the stapedius tendon. Over here on the anterior wall, you see the carotid artery, the tensor tympani muscle and its canal, and the eustachian tube. The eustachian tube helps with balance and clears debris from the middle ear. The last landmarks to go over are the tegmen tympani on the superior wall and the jugular fossa on the inferior wall.
Now we'll be covering the physiology of the middle ear and the impedance matching system. Once sound waves hit the tympanic membrane, the acoustical energy is transferred into mechanical energy as the energy travels from the tympanic membrane through the ossicles and into the oval window. More specifically, the tympanic membrane is 17 times larger than the oval window. This and the lever system of the ossicles, which is aided by their ligaments, helps preserve about 33 decibels of mechanical energy. Now we will be covering the anatomy of the vestibular system. First off, we'll be covering the anterior semicircular canal, the posterior semicircular canal, and the lateral semicircular canal. Notice how the anterior and posterior semicircular canals are connected by the crus communae. Right where the semicircular canals communicate with the utricle, shown here, are the ampullae. Within the ampullae are the cristae, which are then connected to the vestibular branch, as shown here. Here is the endolymphatic sac and the endolymphatic duct, which then helps the utricle and saccule communicate. Within the utricle and saccule are the maculae.
Here's an enlargement of the crista, which lies in the ampullae, and here's an enlargement of the macula, which lies in the utricle and the saccule. The crista is the end organ for the semicircular canals, and the macula acustica utriculi and the macula acustica sacculi are the end organs for the utricle saccular system. Physiology of the vestibular system includes movements of the head or changes in linear accelerations which deflect the capilla, which will either stimulate or inhibit electrical activities in the neurotransmitters. And just for clarification, the utricle is responsible for horizontal acceleration, and the saccule is responsible for vertical acceleration. The semicircular canals are lined with cilia and filled with endolymph. Each time the head moves, the cilia move. This works as a type of motion sensor. The movements of the cilia communicate with the brain, so the brain knows how to keep the body balanced. The horizontal semicircular canal is responsible for the head rotating up and down on a vertical axis. The posterior semicircular canal is responsible for the forward and backward movement, and the superior semicircular canal is responsible for the side-to-side movement. To demonstrate, when I move my head side to side, I'm using my superior semicircular canal because it detects rotations of the head. And when I move from back to forward, I'm using my posterior semicircular canal because it detects rotations on the sagittal plane. And when I move my head up and down, I'm using my horizontal semicircular canal because it detects movements on the vertical basis. And here we see the cochlea. Right here is going to be the scala vestibuli, and here's the scala tympani, and here's the scala media. Over here is the footplate of the stapes in the oval window. When the paralymph gets displaced, it goes up the scala vestibuli all the way to the helicotrema, where it then communicates with the scala tympani and then goes back down. Here's a more zoomed in look of the inside of the cochlea. We have the scala vestibuli, the scala media, and the scala tympani. In between the scala vestibuli and the scala media is Reisner's membrane, and in between the scala media and scala tympani is Basler's membrane, which is also supported by the spiral lamina bone. Then we have the stria vascularis and the spiral ligament. And this is the organ of Corti, which we'll explore in just a second. And this is the spiral ganglion. And here we can see the organ of Corti. It is inside the scala media and rests on the Basler's membrane. You can see the outer hair cells and the inner hair cells, and they each have cilia on top. We have Corti's arch, and then on top of the hair cells, which you can think of as like a blanket, is the tectoral membrane.
And now we'll be covering the physiology of the inner ear. As we mentioned before, when the footplate of the stapes hits the oval window, it will cause the paralymph within the scala vestibuli, shown here, to become displaced. Once displaced, this will cause Reisner's membrane to fluctuate. Once Reisner's membrane has begun to fluctuate, this will cause the endolymph within the cochlear duct, as shown here, to be displaced as well. Once displaced, the outer hair cells and the Basler membrane will begin to fluctuate, which will also cause the inner hair cells to fluctuate. Once both set of hair cells have begun to fluctuate, they will begin to bend across the tectorial membrane. And once they have begun to bend, the stereocilia at the top of them will also bend, which will then, due to mechanical, chemical, and electrical processes, cause an action potential to be formed in the nerve cells right here. The action potential will be then sent down to the spiral ganglion, and then they will travel all the way into the auditory cortex through the central and auditory pathway.